did we remember that pandemic before? How many people were conversant with the Spanish flu? How many people remember it? How many people ascribed huge impact to it? I don't know about you, but it wasn't on my radar. So I don't think that's a coincidence. In a more modern society that we have now, technology and medicine and the way we think about solving problems are different than in the 14th century. In the 14th century, your best bet was to go and pray. And that's it. There's not much you can do. In the 20th century, we had developed the theory of germs and how illnesses propagate, etc. And we could do something about it. And this is very much the case now as well. So the impact of the more modern times is less than it used to be. So I'm not sure whether I need to go on a lot more, but maybe let me just make one more point. When you ask about impact on foreign relations or international relations, you would need to compare international relations before pre-pandemic situation with a post-pandemic situation, see what changed, how much was the impact. And I put it to you that the main characteristic of pre-pandemic geopolitics during the last 3 decades is the slow or even so slow emergence of a bipolar world that includes the United States on one hand, the incumbent power and the rising power of China. That is the story, the big story, the geopolitical story of the last few decades. And in terms of business, increasing globalization. And the two are connected because China profited most from globalization. It's the biggest increase in wealth, the biggest growth humanity has seen happened in China during the last 3 decades, and thanks to globalization mainly. Will COVID change that? Will the bipolar system be any different after than before? I don't think so. I don't think that big picture will change. It'll still be about the United States and China, and I think globalization will continue. This is not to say, and I want to come to a stop here. I think I'm talking too long already, but that's my English, I'm sorry. Thank you. Now I've forgotten what I wanted to say. But in any case, I think that we will see that the pandemic in a few years, but certainly when a vaccine is found, maybe, yeah, I know. It's not to say that the pandemic will not have any effect. I talked about the big picture, but it will have, and we are already seeing it. Maybe it will have an influence on the chain of supply and production. Maybe you want to shorten these for some products, maybe for medical equipment, things like that. But those are not the kind of changes that will fundamentally reorient international relations like the First World War, the Second World War, or the breakdown of the Soviet Union. It's none of this. This is, and it's certainly not existential threat. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, perfect. That's a positive outlook. I was just putting it forward. I'm not disagreeing. Please, Stefan, your turn.
Well, thank you very much. First, I would like to thank my friend Ismail for welcoming us in this very nice auditorium, and thank you, Motaz and Amra, for your opening words. I will just, continue after Georg by giving you some personal thoughts. And I think, Motaz and Amra, you raised the good question. Would the world be different after compared to before? What will it change? Just one, just a small historical comment after what Georg said. You reviewed the big pandemic events which occurred in the past centuries. I think one of the deadliest pandemic, and it has a very strong connection to Egypt, was in the middle of the 6th century in Constantinople. There was a plague which destroyed half of the population of the Byzantine Empire. And this plague came from Egypt. And the Byzantine Empire, it took about 2 centuries before the empire was completely, cleared by this plague. And certainly, this plague had an explanation in the collapse centuries after of the Byzantine Empire. This is just a small historical parenthesis. I would like just make 3 comments. If you look at, the elements, the impact of on international relations of COVID. 3 comments. The first, we are witnessing a kind of shock of uncertainty. The second point is that we are also facing a kind of geo-economic shock. And the third one is we are also seeing geopolitical consequences. And I will very briefly comment these 3 points. It's a shock of uncertainty. In the previous crisis, September 11, the subprime crisis in 2008, etc. In the previous crisis, we knew when it began and when it finished. We are faced with a world crisis. We approximately know when it began, but we don't know when it will be finishing. And this kind of uncertainty about the length of this crisis is certainly something which is very, destroying in terms of confidence and something very destabilizing for our economies, for our leadership, for our governments. So I think that this shock of uncertainty is certainly something which is characterizing this pandemic. The second element is that we are facing a geo-economic shock with a dual crisis. It's a crisis of supply, it's a crisis of demand. And we have seen, last spring, how far we went in the crisis of supply with the complete disruption of production chains, interruption of trade between China and Europe, the US, etc. On a worldwide scale. And it's also a shock and a crisis of demand because we have seen, or we are seeing, sectors which are deeply affected in Egypt. We see tourism, air transportation, etc., etc. So this combination of shock in demand, shock in supply is something which is certainly quite new and shows the magnitude of the geo-economic impact of this crisis. And the third element I would like to finish with, I would just mention, some chapters, and maybe we could come back to them in the interaction with you. Is that, of course, geopolitical impacts, we also already see them. I don't think that pandemic, the COVID crisis, is a rupture. I think it will just accelerate some evolutions which started, ago, and which will probably produce their effects more rapidly. Of course, and you mentioned it, Georg, the rivalry between China and the US. And we have seen, of course, a very concerning developments in the past months. Second, and I think also this is something we have to pay a lot of attention to. This is a new weakening of the multilateral system. At a time when we need, more multilateralism, especially in the field of health and sanitary cooperation, we have seen a country like the US from a World Health Organization, which is completely, I would say, cyclic decision. The third element also in the geopolitics is, I think, and I'm sorry to say so, that we have seen a deep lack of leadership of the US in the way this crisis was managed. I think 20 years ago, the US would have taken the leadership, in cooperation, in coordination. Seen this is coherent with the Trump motto. And I think we have to reflect about this deep crisis of the US leadership, which has been shown in this crisis. I think there is another element, and of course it matters very much for the region. This is also the weakening of oil producers' country, because not only you have an economic crisis caused directly by the pandemic, but also you have a big crisis which will last certainly in the demand of oil, of gas, etc., which will certainly deeply impact the situation of oil producers in this region. And finally, and this is probably a kind of hope for us, I think this crisis revealed positively how Europe could benefit from the pandemic. And what has been decided, the fact that Merkel has decided to authorize the Commission to borrow this relaunching a massive economic plan. I can't remember, Christian, but $7 billion or euros, sorry, partially financed through a debt by Europe. This is the first time ever, 750 billion. And I think such a result wouldn't have been possible, in the normal circumstances. So once again, Europe shows that the European project is progressing in a context of deep crisis. So these are the few elements I wanted to share with you, and of course we could interact later on. Thank you, Anne.
Stefan, thank you very much. That's a fantastic intervention. I tried to invite non-Europeans to also have a view of what's happening. So I will play the devil's advocate and say that it did show a few cracks as well on the national level between different clusters in the EU. So the EU as a group did actually respond in a global way to deal with this pandemic, but at the same time, I think a few cracks did show up, the closing of borders. So it came out definitely much better than the Americans. And I invited also the ambassador of China, but unfortunately he couldn't make it, and the Canadian had a farewell tonight, so that's why he couldn't show up. But I just don't want the Europeans to take the floor here and I'm just playing devil's advocate. Well, here we are. So, Berger, it's your turn to tell us what else.
What else, indeed. Thank you very much. Thanks for this opportunity to talk about this. And I would like to pick up a couple of themes that the chairman started to talk about: is coordination on the one hand, but also the trade aspects. I think we have seen, and I think my two colleagues have said this already, the biggest impact of COVID and Corona has been on the socioeconomic field. Now, both COVID itself, but also the containment measures that have been taken after the breakout of COVID have disrupted our way of life, have disrupted business, have disrupted the way countries work with each other, has disrupted also the global economy. Now, we have already heard a few of these issues. So global demand has gone down, the supply chains have been interrupted, employment has gone down, industrial output has gone down, commodity prices have gone up, foreign trade has gone down, and the capital flow has gone down as well. So you see there is a broad aspect across all the economic spectrum of impact given by Corona. Now, a couple of figures on the European Union side. We will see a shrinkage of our GDP by 7.4% in 2020, which is quite substantial. We'll have an unemployment rate of 9%, which is also highly unusual. Only 1 year ago, when Commission President Juncker said goodbye at the European Parliament, he was very proud that we have had the highest employment rate of about 235 million people at work only a year ago. This is no longer the case. Then we also see that the accumulated budget deficit will also go to 8.3% of GDP. Again, something that is quite unheard of in the European Union. Now, something that affects both the European Union and Egypt is obviously trade, foreign trade. And here worldwide, foreign trade will go down by 10 to 16%, depending where you are and how you count it. And this is, of course, coming after the trade tensions of last year, where they occurred between the US and China. So this is accumulating the impact on global trade. In many countries, you have certain sectors of the economy affected most. This is tourism, this is services, and these are all areas where there is stronger integration across the globe. So where there is integration with the effect on the supply chain, with the effect on the ground, we're not countries, we're regions. In Italy, for example. So it is not really a national thing. It's and this is because member states of the European Union are the first responders to a crisis. It's not the Union, it's the member state. And depending on the member state, also within the structure of the state, you have regions, cities, you have different structures that are responding first to a crisis. This is, I think, what happened and maybe led to this confusion. But I think the European Union very quickly stepped up to the plate and stepped up the coordination of the member states and with the institutions. I'll give you a couple of examples. The first one was return flights. Member states have to organize return flights together with the European Union and with our partner states across the globe. Return flights for about 600,000 people that wanted to go home. The second one, again, borders. Yes, borders closed down, or the flow across borders was interrupted, but very quickly the concept of green lanes was introduced, meaning we have to make sure that people can cross, we have to make sure that goods can cross, that trade can continue, that the flow of goods can continue. This green lane concept within the European Union, but also with our immediate neighbors, was introduced in March this year. The next one was recommendation to limit the spread of the virus. And here, the European Union decided to close our external borders very early. So only essential travels were possible, and we still have this list of green and red countries where we really try to limit the spread of the virus. Then the whole question came up about medical supplies, and I'm sure you remember the stories again in March and in where there was a competition, a global competition, who can grab first shipments of masks and gowns and whatever. So the European Union launched very quickly a massive procurement program for masks and gowns and respirators and ventilators and whatsoever, together with the next thing is, and I move now into the next phase, the next thing is research in finding and developing a vaccine. The European Commission, together with other partners in the G20 group, held a conference in early May, raising money for finding a vaccine and developing a vaccine. And we stand today at 16 billion euros of money that has come together to find a vaccine. Just a couple of days ago, the Commission introduced a new program. It's called COVAX, and this COVAX program is roughly 400 million euros, is to make sure that the development, but also that later on the distribution of this vaccine can be done in an equitable way, not only within the European Union, but also across the globe. So again, something the Union wants to reach out to our partners outside the European Union to make sure that this vaccine will reach everybody. The next thing that we're doing now, and Stefan has already alluded to that, is how do we deal with the socioeconomic, in particular the economic impact of the crisis. So a package of 4 trillion, so 4,000 billion euros has been put together, which consists of grants and loans, and consists of a massive security purchase program by the European Central Bank of public securities and private securities of about 1,000 billion euros, 1 trillion euros. Then 750 billion euros will go into a loan and into a grant program for the member states, for businesses. The European Investment Bank has launched a program to support the engine of our economies, small and medium-sized enterprises. This is the engine that produces employment, to make sure that businesses can work, that people can either keep their jobs or get again their jobs when the crisis is over. And the final point I want to make is now what comes next. So what I've just described is what's happening right now. In addition to the funds that we are raising, also the budget of the European Union for the next 7 years was decided by the member states. Now it's in the European Parliament. We have to see. Hopefully, it will be decided this week. But that will also socio-economic recovery of the European Union. But then there are four concepts I want to mention at the end. One is resilience. The other one is preparedness. The third one is the Green Deal. And the fourth one is the digital transformation of the economy. The resilience and preparedness go hand in hand. We have to make sure that we will be not hit again. And you can already see, on the horizon, the second wave coming, particularly in Europe, that we will not be hit again, and that we don't have to lock down again, and we don't lose more jobs, and there's even a more severe impact on the socio-economic situation of the European Union. So there's resilience of our health system, how to make sure that the health systems across the continent can cope with recurrence of the crisis. Same goes for preparedness, how to make sure that we have all the stocks available that are needed for hospitals, all the stocks available that are needed to treat people. The vaccine I mentioned already, but also gloves and gowns and masks, whatever the problem was in March. So that is, these are the two immediate activities of the European Commission in the next few months. Then contributing to the recovery. And so the idea of the Green Deal was already before COVID to make sure that European companies, together with partners outside the European Union, can contribute to make the European continent carbon neutral by 2050. But that is not only carbon neutral by 2050. That means that companies, that research, that many institutions have to work for that. So there will be new development of technology. There will be new development of processes, and we want to do this, of course, with our partners across the globe. So there is a lot of opportunity coming up. And the last point is the digital transformation. Again, we have seen now during the crisis that we need to do more online. We need to rely more on digital instruments and platforms. And again, hope that the idea is to help modernize the economy, the way we do business. And again, for our partners across the globe, there will be big opportunities to contribute and to work with the European Union. So there are not only challenges, there are also a lot of opportunities coming up in the near future.
Thank you very much, Pastor Berger. I just have a couple of points that I just want to sum up quickly, which we all agree that the socioeconomic impact is very clear. We need to cooperate, and that what we have gone through so far has accelerated the change that was already going to the change that was already occurring in the dynamic of international geopolitics. Now, the response of the EU is very impressive, but you did mention that we have a problem with how the US has behaved or has adopted this international cooperation, how they're working on it. We have to talk to the US. We also have to have channels with China, because otherwise you're only working within the EU. Now, for our countries, and I have a question here from Ambassador Ofsat, which we will refer to in a second. He will make two. So wait for it. The other thing is, no, just kidding. The other thing is so how can we bear this cost? Not myself as a person who can no longer travel because I can't get a visa. I come from the wrong country. And if I need to send my kids to school, they can't go. So this is a problem. This is a huge problem, which is actually isolating different clusters of the world, which affects day-to-day life. So as much as optimistic as I want to be, I have to ask you now to move on to this, how this is affecting us. So now the preparedness and digital transformation it must incur a huge cost for struggling economies after how many months of lockdown, and with the problems that we might have, the people that used to travel, the people that used to have jobs in the EU. How can we in the African continent talk to you at the same when the Americans are having a bit of an isolationism? We don't know the results of the elections soon. And at the same time, I think that Asia has gone into a lockdown almost entirely from separate countries. So I would like your feedback on these specific ideas. How will the EU or how will we work together in this post-COVID? Now that we're getting a second wave and some people are getting third wave, and how is the world economy going to respond? I'll start with you again, Georg, please, in English.
Thank you. Well, these are good questions, and I'm sure that nobody has a complete answer to these. It's a bit learning by doing. We know more about the illness, about the virus than we knew at the outbreak, and we know better how to handle it, what works, what doesn't work. We've seen best practices. We've seen countries that do a lot better than others. Just name Taiwan or New Zealand. And by the way, these are not part of huge groups of states that cooperate with each other. They did it they pretty much on their own. And they show some of the more important methods of dealing with such pandemics is, apart from discipline and general preparedness, is tracking. The more you can, the quicker and more precisely you can track who caught the illness, the less heavy-handed your measures need to be. You don't need to close down the economy. You don't need a lockdown if you can accurately track. And with visual consequence to the economy, obviously, if you don't have to lock it down. So this is something that we learn. It's highly controversial, the whole topic of tracking. It includes issues of privacy. It'll be very interesting to see who will be setting the standards. Will this be China, or as I hope, Europe? We're in a good position. We have good technology there. And I think this is one of the elements and one of the things that might change. On what can we do during this crisis to enhance the or to lessen the inconvenience of travel restrictions and so forth. I think digitalization is the only fairly quick fix that we have. So your Zoom conferences, etc., I don't like them. You probably don't like them. They're better than not having any contact at all. It works at least for some time. And the hope is that with time we'll find a vaccine or some sort of medical solution to the problem. And in general, I think, as Stefan, I totally agree with him that the pandemic has very often highlighted certain things that were there independently of the pandemic, that were there before, but they became very clear. For instance, the thing that you mentioned, the lack of US leadership. I mean, this region of the world knows about this. This is not news that came with the pandemic, but the pandemic showed it again. But I don't want to be that negative. It's not that I don't see these problems, but I also see the upside. To give you an example, this more populist idea, this anti-globalist impetus that you say, perhaps, free trade is perhaps not all it's cracked up to be. It causes more problems, etc. It was a bit popular in certain countries, etc. What was the reason for that? What was the reason for the skepticism? Why did people vote for parties and persons who had such opinions? Sorry?
Can we please try to put the phones on silent? I'm so sorry to ask.
Right. No, not at all. And some of the reason, what people say, is those sectors, parts of society, those people who lost through the globalization. Those are white factory workers in the Midwest or wherever who lost out to Asian workers gaining. Globalization took away their jobs. So there was a movement against globalization or free trade, at least theoretically, not that it happened actually, but at least there was the rhetoric. This pandemic would seem to give them an additional argument, saying, look, this pandemic wouldn't have happened unless we had such a closely networked world where everybody travels. This is part of the globalized world. But I don't see that happening. What I see is, again, most people saying, well, yes, this is a problem, any pandemic, if you have a big network connected world, anything will spread. The 4 factors of production will spread and move freely with goods and services and people and capital and ideas. And of course, illnesses. But not just illnesses, also cures to those illnesses and vaccines. All that will also spread quickly and be more likely to be found. So yes, it creates certain problems, but at the same time, it's also the means to try and solve these problems. International cooperation, and by that I don't mean necessarily big multilateral institutions and states working together, but very much the much maligned globalized order, where companies and private enterprise and businesses look for solutions and find them in different parts of the world and ideas coming together. And don't forget also the academy and different universities working together. Also be private universities. So I don't think when we talk about cooperation as diplomats, we tend to think of things like the United Nations, big. I don't think that is a particularly fruitful approach, or not the only one. The World Health Organization hasn't covered itself in glory necessarily. But companies working on the vaccine, this is what's happening now. And that's very international. Even presidents that say, yeah, who's going to get the vaccine first and what happens with them? And so for somebody who thinks America first and then wants to buy a German company that produces the vaccine, possibly, and then Germany becoming part of that company, that's interesting, isn't it? And it's certainly not not a narrow nationalist focus. I think people see, what I'm trying to say is that people see that the solution to these problems that are caused by a very connected world is that very connected world itself. That's where solutions will come from, and not from a retreat into some sort of autarky thinking.
Okay. Stefan, please. Just one quick addition to what Jorg just said. I think this pandemic revealed in Europe, but probably elsewhere in the world, our fragilities, our vulnerabilities, and our when we were obliged to queue up on Chinese tarmac to get masks. This is a problem for societies, for our countries, where we were obliged to beg a Chinese company to send anesthetic products because we had shortage of them. So we revealed through this pandemic that we are too much dependent in terms of trade, in terms of location, of chain of values and of production. So vulnerabilities. And the response to that, I think this will be probably one of the positive elements post-COVID, is that undoubtedly there will be a rebalance in our trade relations with China. More control of their investments in Europe, relocation of strategic production in Europe, certainly transfer of activities, these kind of things, but there will be a rebalance. There is no other option, because this crisis, because of this too high dependency, has shown also that our states were not well prepared to such a global crisis. And the third element I would like also to mention is that we have to keep in mind that confrontation, trade confrontation between China and the US will continue. Of course, there is a big factor of uncertainty, which will be the result of the elections on the 3rd of November. And it's adding, to this climate of world uncertainty. But I think in Washington, there is one issue of consensus, is that this confrontation with China, especially on trade, on digital economy, etc., on control of digital investments, there is a consensus to consider it will continue, whether it would be Biden or Trump re-elected.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I agree with you fully, and I think that what this pandemic has showed us as well, we have to rethink the planet. We have to rethink, like to give us his insight after Ambassador Berger, to Ambassador Ofsat, who's head of the Foreign Committee. Ambassador Saad first. The minister has spoken. He is among many hats and many competences, is one of my idols and my best friends all my life in the ministry. He also sits on the board of the Canadian Council. So we'll go to Berger, and then you have until 7, and then we'll go to Ambassador Saad. He has as much time as he wants, and if Minister Musa would like to head, he represents you. And then the floor is open, and we'll try to together find some answers. Please.
Oh, thank you. Since the more prominent speakers coming up, will be very short. So, first of all, to deal with the socio-economic impact of the crisis, as I've said before. And here, I would plead really, let's grab the opportunities that are also around the corner. So cooperation is certainly one, but also under the preparedness heading, something in the lines that Stefan just said. I think we need to make sure that our supply lines will not get interrupted anymore. And one way of doing this is, of course, shortening the supply lines. And shortening the supply lines means you have to relocate production closer to where you need things. I mean, if I speak from a Eurocentric perspective, of course, closer to the European Union, closer to the Mediterranean, closer to countries like Egypt, that could be part of that. So that is one thing, one way of doing it. Because tomorrow, while the crisis is in one place of the world, in another place of the world, you don't get the supplies because the supply line is cut. The other thing is a lesson that we have all learned in Europe, that we should be proud that we have a functioning social systems. That people in Europe generally have not fallen between the cracks when they lost jobs because there was unemployment insurance or there was many other things, and there is now support for the companies, short-term work, support from the governments, and so on. This is a lesson I think we should really keep in mind, that we should keep our social systems that we have and we are proud of in place. The third one, coming to the point you made about vaccine. Exactly what I mentioned before. The Commission has just launched this project, has joined a worldwide project to make sure that the vaccine is not only dominated, or is not hijacked in one place of the world, but will be made available across the globe in a different way.
That was very short. Ambassador Off, please. It's coming. I do agree with Ambassador Berger on Egypt being very closely related to the EU and the Mediterranean. I think that our first area of interest is the EU, and that's why I think it's very good that we have you here, that you can give us more ideas about how we can continue to integrate and how we see the way forward with this COVID. Ambassador Saad, please.
Thank you very much. I think I'd like to first thank you, Ambassador Dali, for organizing such quite an interesting gathering that would bring three ambassadors from the EU. And before I get to my comment or question, I'll give a warm welcome to Ambassador Christian Berger, who is, has just arrived, and he is very well known to the different sectors, with its ability to improve, to rectify mistakes, to give the relations between EU and Egypt, a good impetus. By force of habit, I have to get the permission of my minister first. Can I ask Minister Musa? He was my minister for so many years, and I feel that I continue to be bossed by him, wherever he is. Well, I think we heard very interesting questions and different points, so I'll make, I want just to bring the discussion into a different perspective. That's EU and Egypt, not EU and Egypt, but EU first and EU and Egypt. I think that may be different from other. I think the EU came out of the pandemic as a winner because before the pandemic, the EU was going through a very difficult time, setbacks. You're talking about Brexit. You're talking about populist trends, parties. Even to the extent that there were the suspicions were shed on the concept of the union itself. Let alone the kind of continuous criticism from the other part of the Atlantic, of the EU and the welcoming of the Brexit. All these, then came the pandemic. Pandemic revealed two very important things. One is that there is rather a division within the EU, between the North and South. There are differences that were hidden, maybe, and then came the pandemic to reveal all these problems. Second, the very surprising unreadiness of many European governments and mitigating the crisis. And I think these two important things within the EU, I think they were a surprise even to the EU countries and peoples themselves. And why the EU came as a winner? Because first, with a strong commission, new commission, very strong new commission, and with a kind of a very elegant German, French leadership. I think that, with all due respect to all EU members, but I think there is a kind of de facto understanding between the two big countries, that helped very much to push the EU forward. We end by the summit. I think the EU ended by having two important things, that they brought back to a great extent the solidarity among the members between the North and South, and launched huge strategic initiatives. You are talking about Green Deal, you are talking about digital transformation, you are talking about electronic commerce, plus strategy for Africa. Those were strategies that were proposed before the pandemic, and everybody thought that they will go away. And what happened, due to the strength of the new EU, if you want, all right, they became pillars for the future. And I think that would help very much to answer so many questions. How the EU will address its relationship, whether with China or with the United States, because it's the concept of allies is very different now. I mean, no longer the same. You are talking about a different meaning of allies. This is why the EU, I think, is becoming, is coming out of pandemic stronger. But I want to just link this with the relation with Egypt, because I think Christian Berger just mentioned, and Ambassador Hanawi touched upon, these initiatives. We are talking about Green Deal, digital transformation. I think so far we feel that there is a kind of soft and how can I say it? A weak point. That we see in the EU, that they believe that this is theirs. I mean, what's happening? The initiatives, they don't belong to the EU. They affect very much the relationship between the EU and its partners all over the world. And if you apply today the Green Deal as well as the digital transformation, that would affect very much its relations with their partners, including Egypt, or starting from Egypt. And then, as Ambassador Minawi has just mentioned, I think we in Egypt and in almost all developing countries, we cannot afford dealing with the Green Deal. We cannot afford alone, I mean, we cannot afford alone to deal with the Green Deal. We cannot afford with the digital transformation, although there are huge efforts are taking place here in this country. But if you have fixed 2030, for example, 2030, I mean, 2030, that would be the time when you have 50% carbon neutrality. How that would affect Egypt? How would that affect the relations between the EU and Egypt? And if you can succeed in this, what about 2050, when you reach 100 carbon neutrality? So I think there is something very important that the EU should know and listen to, that their partners and their partnership with so many countries all over the world are becoming a strong arm in dealing with their even allies in the past or the new allies in the present. And a special attention should be given to how you address your partnership with your partners. And this is a kind of question of what you get the answer to it is, how you think that the EU will steer its relationship with its partners, right? Well, China and the States, I mean, things will be different. I mean, but in the case of the States, you never know. I mean, it's very much different because it depends on who is there. But in the partnership, something is lasting, it's strategic, and it's very important that we have to find how we can go together to build a new future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. The floor is open for. Mr. Morrison, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I wish to thank the chairman, Montaz, for inviting me to this very interesting panel. And also to meet before his departure to his new post. And of course the intervention of my dear friend Rafsat, a knowledgeable economist of the Egyptian diplomacy. And I thank the three ambassadors of France, of Austria, and of the European Union for their very learned and intelligent interventions on the issue, which is the impact of the pandemic on future international relations. I'll stick to that title, the impact on international relations. I would very briefly refer to 4 or 5 realities. Number 1 is about the failure to find a leader at the time of crisis. This is perhaps the first time since the end of World War II and the emergence of the current system, international system, multilateral system, Western leadership of the world, that a question mark was obvious about the performance of the leader and of the whole Western alliance. So this is the first thing, the failure of leadership. The second one is the failure of the international system itself. There was no role for the General Assembly of the United Nations or the Security Council, for that matter. It came out, the Security Council came out too late in dealing with this issue. So did the General Assembly. And another question mark within that system, in the multilateral system, came up concerning the performance of the specialized agencies. In fact, the specialized agencies are the success story of the multilateral system. And the failure was the Security Council. But this time, because of the pandemic and the way the specialized agencies, in particular WHO, dealt with this event, with this development, that question marks were raised. What are you doing? Are you really capable of dealing with pandemics of that size? The third failure was to the emerging international system. It is emerging, but is already failing. Not only the question mark about the United States leadership, but the question mark about the Chinese leadership too. Is it possible? Can China really perform in the way that, yes, forget about number one, I am number two and doing better? There's also a question mark here. Then comes the other question mark, larger question mark about globalization. It is a kind of contradictory logic. Globalization was there. We all felt it. But it didn't reach each and every society and individual. With the pandemic, globalization was reintroduced. And individuals in small cities, in the four corners of the world, were talking about the effect on the whole world. So it is the negative side of globalization, but it crystallized the existence and the importance of globalization. Perhaps, contrary to some idea, some of the think tanks, globalization has gained out of this pandemic. Not failed, and not lost, but gained. Reintroduced. We are there. This is the way the world is going to be from now on, with its negative side and positive side. Now, those are the effects. Question marks, still. But are we in a position to reconsider the multilateral system? Can we really refurbish, develop, change? I don't think so. We have to live with the UN as is, with some improvement. We have to live with the competition between US and China for some time. And since three of you are representing the European Union, I would like to say that the European Union has also failed. Where is the European Union? Even from the point of view of science, the vaccine and so on. Where is your weight in the United Nations to move it one way or the other? Where is the role played globally alongside America and China? Can we safely say, don't forget Europe? I don't think so. Nobody now cares about it. What is it? Europe is busy with the Brexit, busy with borders, busy with refugees, busy with so many things. But when it came to the crunch, the crisis, capital C, Europe was also absent. So I am one of those who believe that things are going to change. It will take time, but it will never be the same again.
Thank you very much. Yes. Go for it. May I dissent, Mr. Minister? I don't follow you when you say that we failed. I think you're right. At the beginning, we failed. The fact that we left countries alone, for example, Italy, Spain, when they were at the peak of the pandemic, they were obliged to turn their hands to China, to Russia, we failed. But I think that there was, after this consciousness that we didn't respond positively, then I think you have was at the height of the challenge. What has been decided in terms of relaunching our economies, investing massively, in the future, and that was mentioned by Christian, climate change, digital economy, hydrogen, artificial intelligence, cooperation with Africa, a huge amount of money we have dispersed to assist African countries facing pandemic. I agree with you. The first months of the pandemic was a catastrophe for Europe. But I think we had a kind of, how can I say,
That's fine with me.
and so I think on the long term, the EU and Raoul Saad mentioned it. I wouldn't say we'll be a winner, but I think we'll get out of it stronger than we entered the pandemic. And but I agree with you. There was a crisis of leadership. The US were not, leading as they should have done. We had on the other end, and we still have on the other side, I would say, China trying to show that its model is the successful one, with a kind of balance between seduction and brutality. So certainly there are two very confrontational situations: lack of leadership on one side, the US, on the Chinese side, a kind of assertiveness that their model is the best one. And in the middle, I think Europe behaved not so badly, frankly.
If I may.
I'd like to add something to that because I actually agree with His Excellency the Minister Ali Musa on that.
We're going country.
Exactly. Because but it's not because of that. It's not because of the frugality. But I understood him in a different way. I don't think he was saying that when he said that Europe failed, that it failed to adequately tackle the crisis within Europe.
Too strong a word.
Right.
Fine,
But,
okay.
but what I thought you meant was we didn't step into the void that was left by others in terms of leadership. This wasn't a military crisis. This is about hard power, etc. It's the sort of thing that Europe prides itself on excelling in, right? That sort of thing. Silence, cooperating in a very civil area, and I'm afraid we came up short. But I don't think it's a surprise, and I'm sure you weren't surprised. The difference between what we would like to be and the role that we want to play and the actual role, there's a discrepancy. Everybody knows that, and we're trying to narrow that discrepancy. But the crisis has shown that we're still quite a way off. In that sense, I agree with you. And on the other hand, not always being of the same opinion, Ambassador, because of the leadership of France and Germany within the EU, which is of course perfectly true. That is the motto of the EU, always has been. And this also, in this particular case, certain things where the scope of the financial measures was not the brainchild of, let's say, the Netherlands or Austria. This had Franco-German origins. And the fact that not everybody agreed, I think is a healthy sign, especially how did we go about with the disagreement? It's not that we continue to say, no, I'm right, no, you're right, no. There was a result at the end. And so this is actually a good thing, that despite even severe disagreements, you come up with something that is useful. And that's how we're also still, I think, very much in the process of learning, and nothing like a simple entity. And that's why I think partnership with EU for Egypt or any other third country and towards the EU is always a bit complicated, because the EU is a very strange animal. Not even we fully understand how it works when it works, why it works. It is much more complicated than a nation state. And I feel for you and for everybody who has to deal with this. Thank you.
Well, I think Netflix is one of the greatest, as did Amazon benefited from COVID. I never followed Netflix, but I had a lot of time when I was in the lockdown, so now I understand Netflix season 1, season 2. So I think this format is extremely nice that we could have a season 2 with some input from a different continent. We were supposed to have a voice from, it's not just the EU, but I salute you. Thank you very much. We're still with the floor. We have another 12 minutes. We'll wrap it up by 7:30. So,
thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much for the insightful panel. All the Your Excellencies have shared very insightful thoughts about the pandemic. Also, we're very lucky to have His Excellency former General Secretary to the Arab League, and Mr. Amr Moussa with his insights, which were also very important. I think Your Excellency raised a very important point about why people are moving to different forms of voting. I think it ties in with maybe what His Excellency Amr Moussa was saying in respect of the failures that happened in the pandemic. So I would like to hear your insights of what do you see in the future towards nationalism? Is it something forecasted that people will resort to supporting nationalism as a compensation for the lack of the multinational functioning of all the organizations and the global system? What are your views on that? Thank you very much. And the second question I have for His Excellency Ambassador of France is, what's your views on the future of FDIs from Europe? Not just to support. I'm just wearing my previous hat as CEO to the General Authority for Investment. So being keen about that, I would like to see your views on that. Thank you very much. In Africa and Egypt as well.
Okay, we'll take a couple more questions as well, please.
Thank you, Your Excellencies. Let me first express my gratitude to the EU because I was so lucky to have one of very successful winning project during being the chairman of the Consumer Protection Agency with Germany, France, Spain. And I remember His Excellency, the head of the delegation of the EU, used to say this is the model type of our twinning project because one very successful one. Secondly, as one, I spent all my life implementing laws or being involved in that area. Who's going to pay the bill for what happened? Number one, we had a leakage happen. We don't know from where exactly, China or somewhere else or whatever, but it caused a great deal to countries like us, like other countries from different continents all over the world. This is number one. Number two, what did you expect to do to avoid such event like that in the future? Because we have in the nuclear, we have teams to go to inspect for the nuclear facilities to see if that they run in a proper way or not. Is the WHO is able to control the future for avoid to have such incident like that or not? This is what we have to think about, how we can prevent such event like that, because we've been watching movies since ever. Some movies, exactly the same scenario was in that movies, and we find it's come to reality. After we say this is a science fiction or whatever, but it's come to reality, it's the same scenario. We find the leakage come from nowhere, and all of a sudden it's all over the world. Thank you.
Okay, we'll answer these two questions and see where this was a Dustin Hoffman movie, wasn't it?
Outbreak.
Outbreak, yes. Or something
And
similar.
also you have the world, something like the same happened with, it's 10 years ago. I saw that movie. It was at the same salary, 12 monkeys at the same.
Okay, so ambassadors, this is how do you deal with the conspiracy theory? The floor is open for asking the two questions. Whatever. You want to take FDI first or the second one?
On the first question on nationalism, we will face. No, it's okay. We will face in the months to come in Europe after the sanitary shock, after the economic shock, which was recalled by Christian, globally minus 10% of GDP for the Eurozone, which is of course a huge setback, probably the worst figure ever since the Second World War. And we face now a third wave, which will be the social impact, with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of laid off, jobs off, unemployment. And it will certainly have impact on the rise of populism in Europe. But on the same time, and this is something we haven't mentioned, and I think this is a very strong feeling among European public opinions, there is a very strong request of regaining our sovereignty. So how would we combine probably this tendency to turn the electors, will turn their backs to populist movements, and also this request from our governments, European governments, to respond to this demand of regaining our sovereignty. On the FDI, I think two elements. The first emergency in Europe is to recover. I think under the control of Christian, the global outlook is that Europe will not come back to its pre-COVID economic situation in terms of growth of GDP before at least 2022. And so certainly during that time, the priority will not be to invest abroad, but to reinvest in Europe, in relaunching our economies. And second, as I mentioned earlier at the beginning of my presentation, is that there will be a relocation in the chains of the world chain of productions. And certainly repatriation rather than exporting it, rebalancing in favor of Europe. So I think it will be probably quite detrimental to a more active FDI policies from European companies. This is my feeling. I don't know if my colleagues share this point. Thank
you. Just briefly on the nationalism question and whether COVID could lead to an increase in the nationalist vote. That's the way I understood you. Because people will have seen that somehow the international system didn't work and become disillusioned with it. I'm not convinced that this would be caused by COVID, because in principle, when you look at the two most pronounced politicians or countries with politicians that going into a sort of, in the West at least, with a nationalist bent, namely the US and the UK. Now, those two countries have not been exceptional in their handling, if I can put it in that way. So any blame for the bad handling of the crisis, as an American citizen, you would not put at the feet of international things. It's firmly at national level. Your government failed. And I think it's fair to say also that in Britain that would be the case. They didn't even participate in the EU procurement of medical equipment. They thought they're better off alone, they can do this. So if people are disillusioned in those countries, they will be disillusioned with their governments rather than. So I don't think that the COVID, whether populism will increase as an after effect of the negative economic repercussions caused, like Stefan expounded, that I cannot rule out, nobody knows. It's too much TD reading. Possible also that people will learn that the way to deal with this sort of thing is to cooperate more. People have a capacity to learn, especially if it hits them hard. On the FDI issue, I'm agnostic, and it seems very plausible what Stefan was saying. On the other hand, a company's decision of where to invest is driven primarily by where they think profits will be highest. So whether Europe is doing badly or not is perhaps not the most important part of that question vis-à-vis, for instance, a country like Egypt, but the investment climate here. And so there's a lot of scope for the countries that want to attract FDI to get their business together and do a better job at attracting it. Even if companies are short on money, they will still want to invest, and they will look to where it is best to invest. And if it's better to invest in Egypt than in, I don't know, in a European country, that's what the company will do. On the other question, I didn't quite, the preparedness and crisis and will we be better prepared in the future? This is something I've often thought about because of that pandemic. The pandemic in and of itself, theoretically speaking, couldn't have been a surprise. Yes, the exact time when it happened, etc. But when you look at these risk studies, we always have nuclear war, pandemics, a meteor hitting the Earth. It's not just Hollywood films, they take up, but that pandemics can and do happen. And if they're bad, will affect us, cannot have come as a big surprise. And we had also the bureaucracies to deal with that in the United States and in the UK and in Europe, just that they failed. It's not that it wasn't. And then you ask, why did they fail? And why isn't more being done? And then I put myself back 2 years in time, and if a politician had then suggested, there may be pandemics in future, therefore we need contact tracing, therefore we need to spend more on the health system to have surplus beds, therefore this, that, and the other, and the whole bill will be a few billion, vote for me. It would be a brave politician. So just because you know certain risks are there, it's not an intellectual problem. You know the risks are there. You do something about it, or start doing something about it when it's almost too late. That's human nature. I mean, not stupid politicians, bad bureaucrats, or whatever. That may also be true, that may be part of the story, but it's all of us. Look at your own private life and see where true risks are, whether you're evaluating them correctly, and what you're doing about them. And I think that introspection will show you that it's human nature. So in other words, no, we won't be prepared for the next mess. Thank you.
I think we've run out of time, so I will allow Ambassador Berger to wrap up with his comment, please.
Thank you very much. I just want to pick up on the minister's point about the European Union. Simply to say the European Union is not a centralized state. The European Union consists of 27 sovereign nations. And the interesting thing there is it takes a while on those 27 countries decide on something, particularly on areas where the European Union has no competence. The European Union has no competency on health matters. It's a matter of the member states. But once the 27 member states come together and agree on something, there's a very heavy weight behind that decision. I think this is what we are seeing now, and hopefully this will also make us a heavier player in the international community. On the point on FDIs, simply to say the FDIs in Egypt have gone slightly down from the European Union side. But the point is, I come back to the opportunities. I think there is now an opportunity to relocate our production also to the EU, including to Egypt. We need to create the environment where companies, we cannot tell companies where to invest, but where companies are willing to invest because they find the right climate, the right environment. Because here there's a chance, I think, for the EU and Egypt to work together to create this pull factor for companies to come here and invest. On the rather interesting question about who to blame and if that one that we're blaming has to pay, I think it's interesting to look into legal culpability, but it doesn't get us very far at this very moment. I think we really need to deal with the crisis that it is, and I don't think at the international level we'll be able to ever able to do this to get into legal culpability and who is responsible for this. I think we need to simply all work together in order to get out of this. Now, for the future and how do we prepare? This is the point the Commission is trying to make. We need to be prepared, but it's not only the pandemic. I mean, there are many other issues, and maybe this pandemic was a wake-up call. We have to deal with the climate, we have to deal with water, we have to deal with systems failures, we have to deal with health in general. So maybe we can learn some lessons from what we've gone through now and apply them to other possibilities as well. I mean, I'm not as pessimistic as Georg is. I think we have a chance of getting stronger out of this, with that for the future. But of course, it is difficult to predict what the future will be. And if an asteroid hits us, as Georg is predicting, I'm not sure we'll be able to deal with this. But I think there is now a chance to learn a lesson from the current.
I was just, my own personal opinion is there's no planet B. And there is an imbalance, obviously, lack of leadership, many reasons why we are here, but I think we all have to work together, we all have to be the change. Each one of us has to try hard to deal with this, which we don't know. I will leave the honors to, it was my absolute pleasure to moderate this and be here and be part of this, and I'll let Martez thank everyone that has graced us with his attendance. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us here tonight. I'd like to thank His Excellency Ambassador Berger, Ambassador Mate, and Ambassador Stilfried, and of course my dear friend Ambassador Hinawi and His Excellency Dr. Ismail Salim for hosting us again here tonight. I'd like to thank His Excellency Mr. Mustafa and Ambassador of for the intervention, and this is our first meeting held at this premises, and we're looking forward for future events, and thank you very much. Thank you.
So you can't. Thank you.